All right. Well, folks, it's 3:03, so let's get started. I'm Molly Dykstra. I'm the acting executive director of 120 East State, which is very creatively named. It's actually the address of this historic Presbyterian church in downtown Trenton. We've been here about 300 years, and we have a steeple. It has one of the first American cast bells from the early 1800s in its steeple. And those who've gone up into the steeple notice that there's some other feathered friends who make their home there or have entered there or who like to be around there. So we thought it would be interesting as we are looking at our history together this summer and seeing the birds every day to invite our friend and pigeon expert Sarah Rakowski to tell us a little bit about these neighbors who we know are sometimes not so appreciated. But we think there's more to appreciate, and we have a feeling Sarah is going to help us do that because of this talk today. So I want to invite anybody who's on this call to register any questions that you might have for Sarah in the chat. And at the end, we will go through those and see if Sarah has not already addressed your question. I'm sure she'll be happy to take a look at that. Okay. So Sarah has her presentation to make. We'll have a little chat, and we are recording this call so that we can share it with others through Sarah's generosity and through the wonders of modern technology. Other people will be able to learn about our friends and neighbors here in Trenton, the rock pigeon too. So Sarah, welcome. Thank you so very much for being with us today. We can't wait to hear what you have to teach us.
Thank you. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and start. So before I start talking about the pigeons, first of all, who am I? Hi, I'm Sarah. As you might have read in the flyer for this event, I am from here, went to high school at PHS, did my undergrad at Cornell University, where I spent most of my time avoiding the majority of the university and hanging out at the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. And I'm currently in El Paso, Texas, where it is absurdly sunny out at 104 degrees, getting my PhD in ecology and evolutionary biology. My current focal species is the wild turkey, but throughout my work, I've spent a lot of time studying birds that have close relationships with humans. So this has included, of course, the pigeon, the society finch, which is a domesticated songbird, peafowl, which people have kept in captivity for a very long time and have introduced to places like California and Florida, and then, of course, the wild turkey. So before we jump into talking about rock pigeons, I'd say I might as well start with, sort of meet the family. So pigeons, the words pigeon and dove, they refer to the same animals. In languages like Spanish, there's only one word, which is paloma. But Columbidae is the group of birds that includes all of your pigeons and doves. They are found on all continents except Antarctica. And they really come in all different shapes, sizes, colors, and ecological niches. So one thing a lot of people don't realize is the dodo. That was just a flightless island pigeon. A lot of pigeons are very colorful. The Luzon bleeding heart is not actually bleeding, but just has a bright red spot on its chest. The pheasant pigeon, very not as quite as big as the dodo was, but a very big ground-dwelling pigeon. And then in our area, we have pigeons like the native mourning dove, which you might see even in the city. And then I have to give a shout out to my pet dove, Archimedes, who is a diamond dove, a species that ranges throughout most of arid Australia and also my apartment. So within pigeons and doves, today we're mostly going to be talking about the rock pigeon, which is a single species within that family, scientific name Columba livia, sorry. Yeah. And this species is native to Europe, Western and Central Asia, as well as Northern Africa. They're called rock pigeons because in sort of true wild populations, you'll find them living on cliffs and in caves and on sorts of rocky habitats, typically around grasslands. And one thing, oh yeah, so people, when they talk about rock pigeons, they often talk about their nests being kind of silly looking. All cliff-dwelling birds build nests like that. I'll talk about that a little bit later. But just to get into their biology a little bit, they build very simple cliff dwelling nests, both in true wild populations and in urban areas. Like you can see with this, what might be very generously called a nest in flower pot. They lay 1 to 2 eggs per clutch. Both parents care for their young, which look quite silly when they first hatch, which is this little yellow thing here. But they eventually mature and look more pigeon-like. Um, we often say that rock pigeons mate for life. Um, they mate for life in the same way that humans mate for life, where there are many cases where pairs stay together for life, but sometimes something happens. Somebody goes off chasing another female, or somebody is not feeding the chicks maybe as much as they should, and it is sometimes in behavioral studies called basically a divorce, where they break up. Not particularly common, but it does happen. Pigeons live for typically about 5 years in the wild, but can live up to 20 years in captivity with good medical care and nothing trying to eat them. And then one of the things about their biology that has really influenced their relationship with humans is that rock pigeons are very, very fast flyers. So flying in a straight line, they can get up to 65 miles an hour, sometimes into the high 90s, low hundreds with a good tailwind. That is very, very fast for a bird. Another thing that they can do is they are very good navigators. So in the wild, pigeons are what we call commuters. They're not migratory, but they have a roost or a site where they sleep and rest that they return to every night. But every day they go out and forage at specific sites where they know food is, and they're able to navigate between all of these sites using the Earth's magnetic fields, as well as things like landmarks and the position of the sun. This speed and this navigation ability, those are two things that humans have really been able to use to our advantage. So before I get into the rest of the presentation, I do have a bit of disclaimer. I have a disclaimer. I am a biologist by training. I am not a historian. Although a lot of my work has involved birds that have natural histories that are very closely connected to human histories, I just want to make that clear. A lot of this research I've been trying to do the best historical research I can, but I am not a historian. That out of the way, seeing as wild rock pigeons are birds that live in caves, and a long time ago, a lot of humans lived in caves. Our ancestors and the ancestors of modern domestic pigeons were likely, we know we were spending quite a lot of time together. And we know that early humans, so this is even in the time of the Neanderthals, were eating pigeons, but also from the ratio of bones in these caves that both pigeons and humans were inhabiting, the ratio of bones of birds that were cut up and cooked and eaten versus those that were not show that these people who, people who were first neighbors with pigeons, they were managing them very likely very carefully. So when people talk about being something so easy a caveman can do it, I'm like, oh yeah, managing your resources carefully or for your community and for the future. I think we could learn a little bit from them. But when humans first started building cities and buildings, rock pigeons, they are birds that are looking for things that look like cliffs and caves. And buildings look a whole lot like cliffs and caves. So, what we believe happened is humans in the Middle East began building permanent settlements and cities, and pigeons moved in. These people realized that pigeons are pretty useful. You can eat them, you can use their poop as fertilizer, since these were agricultural societies. Um, Eventually, we see pigeons being included in religious ceremonies and possibly as pets. We can't really tell if anybody was keeping them as a pet yet, but it is certainly a possibility. And how pigeons were kept in these societies is people saw, okay, pigeons are living in our buildings. What if we gave pigeons their own buildings, which is where we get dovecotes coming from? So, dovecotes are buildings built specifically so that pigeons can live there and roost and make nests and rear young. These pigeons are not confined. They're free to come and go and feed out in the environment. So they're really not that difficult to maintain. And within these dovecotes, pigeons are typically protected from natural predators, with humans occasionally eating them and, of course, harvesting their droppings. So we have people and pigeons living close together, and eventually somebody figured out that if you take a pigeon away from its dovecote or eventually away from its closed loft, it will try its best to come back. Now you have a bird that can fly 65 miles an hour and will basically always come back to a certain point. And people figured out the first records of this are in ancient Rome and Egypt that if you can tie a message, either like make a little backpack or make like a little pigeon bracelet, tie a written message to it, and carry it with you and release that pigeon will carry that message home much faster than a person or a horse, or in many cases, a ship will. So we start to see the use of pigeons as messengers. So you can't exactly send a pigeon somewhere, it's not going to know where to go, but you can carry a pigeon with you and release it and have it go home. So this became important for things like business news, where somebody needed to know if a certain merchant had come into port yet and what was on their ship, or governmental news, so knowing who had taken the crown or the results of an election. And continuing throughout history, we see this in military use, where you need to send a message very quickly through dangerous territory. And as people started breeding pigeons specifically for this message carrying and homing ability, so a homing pigeon is just a domestic pigeon that people have trained that has been trained to return to a point. People started to breed pigeons specifically for this ability, and you get people breeding faster and faster and more reliable pigeons. And this is what evolved into what was originally the historical and now modern practice of pigeon racing, where people take pigeons to a set point, everybody releases their pigeons, and then you figure out which pigeon either gets to its home loft the quickest or has the highest average speed. So because pigeons are super useful, you can eat them, you can use them to send messages. Humans have spread this species basically wherever we've gone. So this map, every little colored rectangle represents a place where pigeons are found. The different colors, the purple versus the orange, that's really supposed to be like, where is their native range? Where is their range that people have brought them to? But that's not super clear, just because humans and pigeons have had this relationship for such a long time. So as was shown in the original range map, rock pigeons are not native to North America, but they were some of the earliest livestock brought over by European colonists. So the first records of rock pigeons in North America, we know, were brought to Nova Scotia, likely as a very, very good and reliable type of frontier livestock, because again, if you have a dovecote set up, you basically do not need to feed those pigeons. They're going to go out onto the landscape and find their own food, and they're going to come back and raise young. And typically, you eat the young pigeons to leave the adults to continue breeding and continue finding food. Really, an ideal frontier livestock. It's not that hard to make a dovecote, and you don't need to do a lot unless there's a famine or a drought to maintain those pigeons. So we eventually see rock pigeons being brought to the British colonies, so to Virginia, likely as livestock, and then in a lot of frontiers and forts, we see pigeons again as that very low maintenance livestock. This being said, a lot of early Americans and colonists didn't really need domestic pigeons as livestock, because at one point in North America there was a another species of pigeon which is now extinct called the passenger pigeon, and passenger pigeons would form these huge, huge flocks. And people would go out and hunt passenger pigeons and have all the meat they needed for quite a while. And they would bring meat back to their community. And eventually, these hunts really became an event that all of the men in the community would go out and hunt pigeons and talk and socialize. And we also see references to pigeon keeping in Britain mostly, as well as in France, being associated with the landed elite. So with pigeon hunting versus pigeon keeping, we see a split between European and American ideals of what a community or what a man should be. Now, of course, people did continue to keep pigeons in America. Typically, we see dovecotes being built on farms, estates, plantations, a lot of the time as a status symbol. If you go through early American cookbooks, you see a lot of references to how to cook wild pigeon. Not as many for squab, which is what the young pigeons collected from dovecotes are called. So I have not been able to find a lot of scholarship on this, but it does seem like the act of pigeon keeping versus pigeon hunting in early America may have been a very political one, depending on where you wanted to get your food from and how that showed what kind of person in this burgeoning society you wanted to be. Were you going to be more towards the Jeffersonian ideal, where it's, you and your land and your farm and you're farming all of your food, or that more mercantile, more communal, we're all going to go out from the city and go hunting together? Um, I find that quite interesting. However, as the passenger pigeon went extinct, it went extinct both due to overhunting and to habitat loss. Eating wild pigeon wasn't really as much of a thing anymore, and we did start to see a shift and a lot more sentimental literature of people talking about not wanting to eat pigeons anymore, even if they were keeping them as domestic livestock on their farms or on their estates. And in the 19th century, we sort of see a shift from pigeons being livestock to really pigeons being pets. And I've read in some sources from the time of people talking about, their kids getting pet pigeons and their grandparents being like, "Oh, we used to keep pigeons outside and we used to eat them. Why is this one on my couch?" Um, Stuff like that. And eventually, people began to the practice of breeding pigeons for exaggerated physical traits as well as behavioral traits, so not just homing, but differently colored feathers and different pet feather patterns. That became a big thing. So we start to see the formation of pigeon clubs and pigeon societies where people would get together and show off their pigeons to each other at pigeon shows and socialize, sort of like what they might have been doing at those early pigeon hunts. Um, Pigeons as messengers in this era, sorry. In Europe, they were still very frequently used for military and business communications. In the US, from the contemporary literature I have read, people tend to talk about them as being almost completely obsolete by 1850, due to the invention of the telegraph and its implementation. People still talked, of course, about racing pigeons and keeping pigeons, but they're like, yeah, we don't need these anymore for communication. Despite this, the US military did begin to experiment with the use of pigeons for carrying military communications in the 1870s. So, when I'm talking about pigeon breeding and pigeon breeds, a little digression I want to make is the difference between a species and a breed. So all of these birds, they are the same species. These are all rock pigeons, which is naturally occurring. And then breeds are humans selectively breeding for a specific trait. So in this, a bird like the giant runt, that's size for satinets, it's crests and feather pattern for powder. That inflated neck, that's the crop. So that's a pouch in there that they can inflate and deflate. They do not always look like that. For things like fantails, they have extra feathers in their tails. And then for some of these others, it's beak shape, um, feather positioning, body size, those sorts of things. This variation created by humans was one of the major examples that Darwin used in On the Origin of Species to talk about how traits can be passed down through generations and create new forms. And I don't know, I think that's neat. When we talk about pigeon breeding in America, we also need to talk about sort of the strongest Trenton connection, which is the development of a specific strain, so a specific group within the racing Homer breed, known as usually just as the Trenton or the Trenton Racer. So these were developed in the 1880s for sport racing, so people racing their pigeons against somebody else's pigeons. And the sort of the lore of this breed, it's a bit hard, or this strain, it's a bit hard to get clear historical documentation, historical facts here. Um, but sort of the lore behind these guys is that historically they were used for ship to shore communications, which you're not going to have a telegram cable running from your ship to a city. So you would have pigeons on your ship. And if you were delayed or coming in early, you would send a pigeon out, and that would be able to tell people on shore, hey, we've got this much cargo, or something happened and we've lost some of our cargo, things like that. So the legend of this breed is it descends from those birds. Trenton racers are not super popular in the modern day pigeon racing sphere, which I'll talk about in a little bit, but they are well known for typically having this gold. A lot of them have this golden yellow color and light eyes, as well as somewhat broader wings than other pigeons, other racing pigeons, and being well suited for long distance flights up to 1,000 miles. So, spoiler, pigeons were racing pigeons and homing pigeons were taken back up into technological use, start in the US, starting the Spanish American War to transmit messages over large bodies of water. They were continually used in World War I for when communication, typically radios, failed, and for things like ship to shore or plane to ground communication. Um, Less frequently used in World War II, but there still were many cases of pigeons delivering very, very important messages when all other methods of communication failed. A lot of military pigeon breeding did happen in New Jersey, so at Fort Monmouth, and the people who are still big fans of the Trenton strain say that it was the Trenton strain that went on to be bred and kept as these important military messenger pigeons. So, what has become of the pigeon today? So, a lot of people still keep domestic pigeons as pets. If you've ever been to a wedding or an event and there's a dove release, those are just white homing pigeons. When you release them, they go back to their home and their owner rents them out for another event. Pigeons can make amazing pets, but they're not for everybody. And modern pigeon clubs, just like those of the 19th century, still do exist. Same with pigeon racing clubs. And pigeons, just like they were used in Darwin's day for studying traits and evolution, a lot of those traits are still of great interest to evolutionary biologists. So when we talk about the modern city pigeon, we're talking about an animal that was kept by humans and then either released or escaped. So we call those feral as opposed to true wild. In North America, based on some research that I've done, feral pigeons tend to be larger in more northern and colder regions and smaller and a bit lankier in southern and warmer regions. Um, Let's see. So you can very much eat pigeons. However, I would never recommend eating a city pigeon because a lot of the time they spend a lot of time on the ground, and studies have shown that their tissues can often contain high amounts of heavy metals and other pollutants, to the point at which pigeon tissues are often used as bioindicators. So warning signs of you take a sample from a pigeon living in an urban area and it has a lot of pollutants in its tissues, there's a good chance that people in that area also will. There have also been some suggestions that darker feathering is an adaptation to pollutants, especially heavy metals, where pigeons are able to sort of sequester those hazardous materials out of sort of living tissue and into the feather, where it's mostly inert. Um, that research, it's still a bit up in the air whether that's actually what's happening. And then we do see in modern pigeons massive, massive behavioral shifts away from their wild ancestors. So in some areas, pigeons have learned to be basically nocturnal using streetlights instead of daylight. There are typically less aerial predators at night, and resources are just as plentiful. So why not become nocturnal? As well as, of course, being willing to be very, very close with humans. So I really like pigeons, but there are a few myths about them that I want to get out of the way. So one thing when I talk with people about pigeons is they're worried about pigeons spreading bird flu. That is not, it is technically possible. Any bird can spread avian influenza viruses. However, pigeons really aren't the ones that are doing it. Your biggest culprits for avian influenza spread and transmission is going to be waterfowl, so ducks, geese, swans, gulls, and then things that are going to be eating any bird that they find dead from bird flu. So your hawks, your falcons, your eagles, your scavenging birds like crows. Yeah. Although I will say, if you're in an area with a lot of pigeon poop, Wear a mask. It's not great to be inhaling that dust. And just like any wild animal, you should be very careful about handling pigeons. They can carry things like E. coli. So, wash your hands ideally before and after handling a pigeon or really any wild animal. Another thing I hear a lot about pigeons is that they're stupid. I mean, sometimes you'll see them just kind of sitting in the middle of the road. They know what they're doing. Pigeons in captivity, they've been trained to. There was a big study a few years ago where they were trained with incredible accuracy to tell the difference of a histology slide of a cancerous versus a healthy tissue. That's what this photo is here. There was another study in which they were able to recognize artistic styles. So even if they had never seen a specific painting or print before, they were able to identify this is this style. So this is an impressionist painting um, versus a more formalist style. And they can also recognize people. So this is kind of just an excuse to put in a picture of a pigeon from my local park. If you start feeding them, they will recognize you, even if you're wearing different clothing. Um, yeah, they know who their friends are. Another thing people sort of use as evidence of pigeons being not very smart is again they're often very lackluster nests. However, I mean, a lot of nesting birds build very simple nests. So, like the peregrine falcon, in many cases, it's just eggs on a rock. This bird underneath, that's a thick-billed mirror seabird that a lot of the time just it puts its egg on a rock. So pigeons really aren't unique as far as birds that evolve to live on cliffs, that they will build very simple nests because they don't really need a complicated nest. If the egg doesn't roll away, it's not going to roll away. Another thing I hear people talking about is that pigeons are dirty. No animal is typically willingly dirty. So if you watch pigeons for a while, basically every day, if the conditions are amenable to it, you'll see the whole flock go and bathe in a puddle or a stream. I know my pet dove Archimedes, if he gets anything like on his feet, like any dirt, he gets really upset and he has to clean that off right away. Um, you will also see pigeons grooming each other and grooming themselves constantly just to make sure that there's nothing gunky on them, stuff like that. I have also seen photos of what look like rainbow colored rock pigeons. And people are like, oh, what is this bird? Those are white rock pigeons, typically white homing pigeons that have been dyed. That is not the best for them. It's not permanent since birds do replace their feathers, but it can make them more vulnerable to predators. And sometimes the dye kind of sticks up their feathers and makes flight and grooming a little bit more difficult. There are naturally very colorful pigeons, things called blue pigeons, green pigeons, and pink pigeons. They are exceptionally beautiful on their own. I don't know why people have the need to dye white domestic rock pigeons. So if you're in the area and you see some pigeons around, here's a few behaviors you could look at. So the courtship display is when one pigeon sort of typically runs up to another, puffs out its throat, coos, does some spins. That's usually a male trying to impress a female or a pair reestablishing their bond. Same thing with allopreening. It's really hard for birds to groom and scratch the tops of their heads. So typically pigeon pairs will help each other out with that. If you ever see what looks like one pigeon try to eat another pigeon's head, that's usually an adult feeding its chick. They're regurgitating things into the chick's mouth, which I know it sounds gross, but it works for them. Sometimes if you see pigeons laying down with a wing out, people will say, oh, is it hurt? Is it okay? In many cases, that pigeon is just sunning itself nice and warm. It's a good way to make sure that to get rid of any parasites that might be on them, any like external bugs that might be trying to hitch a ride. Another behavior that pigeons do when they're happy and they're chilling is loafing, where they just kind of puff up. It's real cute. Same with the foot tuck. In many cases, feral pigeons will lose feet or toes to getting them tangled in garbage. So pigeons missing legs isn't too uncommon, but more often than not, when you see a pigeon that you think is missing its foot, it's actually just tucked up into its feathers, because that's just what's comfy for them. Another thing you might see is if you see a big flock of pigeons all flying very closely together and sort of bobbing and weaving through the air, that's them using their high speed to typically avoid and disorient a predator. And then, of course, the behavior of the wing slap. So pigeons will peck and bite each other, but usually when they are really mad, so trying to defend food or a roosting or nesting site or a mate, they will slap each other with their wings. Which, in my own pet dove, Archimedes, he usually does that as a behavior that is in response to bedtime. When he doesn't want to go back in his cage at the end of the day, he will wing slap me. But that's what pigeons are doing if you see them hitting each other with their wings. They're basically saying, hey, stop it. Some other things you might notice about pigeons is that they have a lot of different colors and different patterns. Here are a few of the named and ones with known genetics, so the more common ones that you might see on the day-to-day. I think in places like Trenton, you're going to be seeing a lot more blue bar, blue checker, blue spread. Those are still common here in El Paso, but we do have a lot more red and recessive red birds here. I think because we have a lot of red-roofed buildings here that are the exact same color as those pigeons, there may be some selection going on. But if you watch your local pigeons, you're going to be able to see who's got what coloration, and you might be able to tell individuals apart, just like those pigeons are telling you apart. That did not intend that to sound as creepy as it did. Um, moving on. So yeah, that's my pet dog Archimedes. He did help. Um, some notes, some of the references that I went through when coming up with this presentation that I found especially interesting, that I would highly recommend diving into if you want to learn more, as well as some additional references that may be of interest.
Sarah, wonderful. Thank you so much. This is really terrific. I just to speak for myself, I have learned a ton from you today. Um, I have a question. I don't know if anybody else, I don't see any other questions in the chat, but if anybody has something you'd like to ask Sarah, would you type that on in there? Um, or just do a raise hand motion or something and unmute yourself and speak. Sarah, you made a comment about um, evolutionary biology finding pigeons very helpful. Tell me more about that. You mentioned, which I found fascinating, right? That they can be indicators of pollution and possibly human health, right? Which is very interesting. Tell me more about the evolutionary biology piece, and maybe that's more something you're thinking about today with the wild turkey, say, or
Yeah, so there's one really big lab in the US that does a lot of work on domestic pigeons and what genes cause what traits and how these genes are expressed. It's the Shapiro Lab, University of Utah. Their website is honestly really fun. They have like a little game where you can learn about trait inheritance in pigeons. And it's those traits like body size and feather type, as well as proportion, that are pretty easy to study in pigeons because it's the same species and it's pretty easy to isolate what genes are controlling for those traits and allows us to learn more about what genes control certain traits.
and the biologists extrapolate that across species, or
Often, yes. So we have mouse models and zebrafish models, but in some cases, there are also pigeon models.
okay, wow, very interesting. Very interesting. Anybody else have a question that you'd like to ask Sarah today? Sarah, how did you first come to be interested in pigeons?
I'm from the area and there's a lot of pigeons around, and I just like them.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
there's a lot of interesting history between them and humans, not just in the Americas, but across the world throughout many, many eras of human history. And I just find that sort of thing fascinating.
Right. So the human interaction, connection, and their sort of omnipresence, right? Are there places in the US where we really don't find pigeons?
So basically, anywhere where there aren't people. Um,
Okay.
So there are populations of pigeons that do live far from people, typically on cliffs and mountains, as well as some very cold regions. So throughout much of the north slope of Alaska, except at more densely populated sites like this little one up at Prudhoe Bay, you don't tend to see a lot of pigeons, but they are, if people are there, pigeons are going to be there,
And
basically.
and is that because people would have brought them there, or because the pigeons would have somehow migrated there on their own?
It's both. So pigeons being very fast and being able to fly a very far distance, they're very good at dispersing. So sometimes we think about animal ranges and dispersal as going from island to island. What pigeons are looking for is basically island to island of cities. So sometimes it's people on purpose carrying pigeons with them. Sometimes it's pigeons finding useful habitat, which is a city or a town.
And would they, because you had mentioned that they're not generally migratory, they would relocate because there's some stressors, or there's just opportunity, or
So usually that'll happen when there's a lot of pigeons in one area and they're starting to compete for resources. So you'll get usually younger individuals
Mhm,
going off to try and find new areas where they can live. And
mhm.
that's typically how you get dispersal in pigeons.
I see. And so in a city like New York or here in Trenton, I imagine, um, I mean, so let's say a city like New York, right? Large city, surely lots of different birds, right? Because that's part of a migratory path. Um, uh, what would what would one expect that population to remain quite stable? Um, and if not, why?
So, with pigeons in a place like New York City, with a lot of resources, both food as well as habitat and nesting sites, pigeons are gonna, like any animal, they're gonna increase, basically be at, in that case, at carrying capacity. So, sort of the maximum amount that that ecosystem can support. And they're not really gonna fluctuate from that number very much unless something happens. So, unless there's a massive disease outbreak or I don't know, New York City gets abandoned by people and suddenly there aren't resources anymore, something like that.
Right. And have there been incidents where there have been disease outbreaks that have killed off whole areas of pigeons, or are they quite resistant?
Rock pigeons tend to be pretty resistant because they are a very social species and have evolved to be able to survive in close contact with one another, which also means a lot of sharing of pathogens. There are occasionally diseases like certain pox viruses that can cause smaller die-offs. But usually, if you're seeing mass pigeon die-offs, that's an environmental thing. So there's a pollutant or a poison in the environment that is killing them off in large numbers.
And would probably be killing off other individuals of other species too.
Probably as well, yes.
Right, right. Okay, fascinating, fascinating. Um, so here we are in this old building. We have this old steeple. We have a bell, which clearly the pigeons are roosting above because the pictures we have of it show their droppings on it. Um, is there anything, is just leaving them be, letting them be the best kind of understanding of our pigeon neighbors?
I would say yes, unless you're getting amounts of pigeon poop that you're struggling with. So if you're getting layers and layers of those droppings and you're having people regularly go up into the steeple and you're noticing that it's drying out and there's a lot of dust in the air, or it's not drying out and it's starting to decay, that's really only when it becomes a problem. So it's not the pigeons themselves, it's the poop. And that is one of the things that people did first start keeping pigeons for, is because they produce a lot of poop and that poop is good fertilizer. But we don't always have the best places to apply that fertilizer in this day and age. So yeah, I would just say leave them be up there, unless you're running into a problem with that.
Right. And then it would just be try and keep them from getting into the place where they're roosting and creating that mess. Right. Right. Okay. Very good. Well, we will appreciate them. And I'm guessing that you would advise, well, now that's not a fair assumption. If I wanted to get to know some of my pigeon neighbors, is that advisable?
Um, I would, if you're thinking about like feeding them, the issue with that in a lot of urban areas is the leftovers, so extra seeds. I usually feed pigeons seeds instead of bread. It's better for them.
Mhm.
Leftover seeds can cause issues with rats, mice, other pests, as well as you don't really want to be handling wild animals that much, even though pigeons not truly wild, they're feral, but you just want to keep things typically hands off. So I would say, unless you have a spot where you know that you can feed them and there's not going to be issues with other pests, just admire them from afar, take notes based on the different plumages, and you'll be able to tell individuals apart, that sort of thing.
And I'm guessing that if I wanted to be friends with them and have them recognize me as a friendly, that probably wouldn't happen without food, though. Am I
That will
right?
not happen without food, no.
It wouldn't happen without food, right? Okay. Well, I will just keep my eyes on them and see if I can distinguish a few that seem to be around and at least familiarize myself with them, even though they may not particularly notice me. Sounds like that's what would need to happen. Yeah.
Yeah, something along those lines.
Something along those lines. Okay.
But if you're in the area regularly, they're going to know that you're one of the regular people there. It's things like that that they're able to notice.
They would just know that. Yeah. Very
Sarah,
interesting. Huh.
I have a question.
Oh, thank you. Hi, Elizabeth. If
Hi.
Elizabeth's iPad, is that Elizabeth behind it?
Yes,
Uh-huh.
that's me
Welcome,
behind it.
Elizabeth.
I'm not sure myself, but I so when we went to Israel, we went to Masada, and there were a lot of dovecotes there. So, Sarah, were those actually pigeons then? Do you know anything about the history of like the pigeons that were used like in King Herod's days? Actually, if you read that, there were when we went to Masada, there was a lot of a dovecote. So those were actually pigeons.
Yeah, so those are going to be rock pigeons living in those.
Okay. All right. Great.
And
And
so in
we,
those, Mhm.
no, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Elizabeth.
No, I was going to say we also have pigeons that come and visit our cat every day because we have a room that has a lot of windows. And every day these pigeons come looking for our cat because they drive him crazy because they know he can't get to them. So
They
he just
know.
sits there and they just come, they actually come, it looks like they come looking for him.
Could that be true, Sarah, that they're connecting with some other animal that way?
Might be. My guess is they're just checking to make sure that he can't get out.
He can't get out today either, so we're safe, right?
Like if I
Right.
had a bear that came outside of my apartment every day, I'd be checking to make sure that my door was locked.
Do they communicate with I mean, if they found that one day, whoops, the cat is out, would they somehow make that known among their friends and neighbors or?
So pigeons don't have as complicated of vocalizations as things like crows, ravens, and jays do. But one of the things that they do have is if you ever spook a flock of pigeons and you hear that super loud sound, they have specialized feathers that make sort of a unique noise that you really only hear if they're taking off at a high speed, and that lets other pigeons know, hey, there's something scary over there. And they will also start to avoid that area. And as social animals, if one group of pigeons starts to avoid an area, all of the others are going to as well.
Yeah. Great questions, Elizabeth. Thank you. All right, folks. I think our last chance for questions for Sarah, who's been with us now about 45 minutes. Well, Sarah, would you be willing to share your presentation with us?
Absolutely.
Okay, and we'll make sure all of you who are on this call, I'm guessing that you got the link through an invitation through your registration. If by any chance you just got the Zoom link somehow and want to put your email into the chat, we'll make sure that you get a copy of both the recording and of Sarah's presentation. We want to thank you, Sarah, so very much. This has been delightful and truly elucidating. as I get older, one realizes how many things one takes for granted and just has never learned about. And certainly pigeons are one of those that we all, just as a feature of our lives and of our world, but you've made us appreciate them better today. So we want to say thank you, everybody, for coming to be a part of our presentation. If you would like to find us more, through your registration link, you're learning about 120 State. We are working hard to tell the story of this place over the 300 years that people have been here that we know of, the settled people anyway. Of course, Native Americans were here many, many more years before that. We're trying to learn that history too. But the church that has occupied this place for that period of time, we're diving into that history, we're telling that story and hoping to recreate a place that can be a real resource to the people of Trenton, but also to friends like you who are coming to us from other places as well, including Sarah. And on a personal note, I knew Sarah as a child, as a young girl, in our town of Princeton, and I'm thrilled to see you again, Sarah, and thank you so much for bringing all of your knowledge and expertise to us today. We're truly grateful.
Yeah, and thank you for inviting me. I always love an opportunity to talk about birds, so yeah, I'm happy.
Wonderful. Well, we know your contact now, and other people
Yeah,
know about you, so you may get a few more questions come your way about our bird friends and all their wonderfulness and variety.
my email up. Yep.
And please tell Archimedes that we were grateful for the help.
Yes, he did help. He is not joining me in this presentation today because he has very bad computer etiquette. Likes to play with keys. So
He likes to, like, we can see that from your photo here, and I'm sure all kinds of strange things start to happen when that happens. I love it. I love it. Okay. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. We'll let you go now. Thank you, Sarah. We'll be in touch. Okay.